While walking past, John froze in surprise. He spotted a woman with 4 small children who looked strikingly like him, though he had no idea how this moment of curiosity would transform his life. The golden sunlight seemed to wrap everything in its warm glow, yet John had been lost in thought all morning. He had become a self-made millionaire thanks to his thriving tech company. John was a committed bachelor, accustomed to snapping his fingers to get whatever he wanted. Yet, year after year, he found little joy in expensive cars, glamorous women who surrounded him, or even his business achievements. Everything started to feel hollow and meaningless. He had spent his life entangled in fleeting, superficial romances, viewing them as little more than passing indulgences. Lately, though, he longed for something deeper. A sense of warmth and the comfort of family. He began to dream of coming home at night to a place filled with love and belonging. Standing at a crosswalk, his gaze drifted across the sidewalk, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. That's when he saw them, a young woman hurrying along, holding the hands of 4 small children who couldn't have been older than 5. The scene might have been entirely unremarkable, except for one shocking detail: the children were practically his spitting image. This wasn't a vague resemblance but an uncanny mirror of his younger self. John furrowed his brow, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. How could this be possible? He muttered under his breath, unable to tear his eyes away. His heartbeat quickened as his mind raced, desperate for an explanation. He sat frozen in disbelief for so long that a line of cars began honking behind him. Snapping out of his daze, his eyes fell on an inscription on a nearby wall. "Children are born of love, not just blood." Without hesitation, he turned sharply toward the crosswalk. His Lamborghini darted across the street as he pulled over to catch the woman just before she rounded a corner. Jumping out of his car, he slid on his dark sunglasses, concealing the turmoil in his eyes. The woman stopped, startled by the sudden appearance of a man who radiated elegance and confidence. The kind of person you wouldn't expect to encounter on a busy city street. But what truly unsettled her was the intensity with which he gazed at her children. The woman instinctively stepped in front of the children, positioning herself as a shield while the kids peeked around her curiously. They were 4 little ones with light blonde hair, shiny dark eyes, and angelic expressions that radiated pure innocence. And as for the resemblance, it was undeniable. John stood frozen, staring at them before finally stepping closer to the woman. His voice, deep and steady, carried a hint of astonishment he couldn't mask. "What is the name of their father?" he asked bluntly, his tone edged with urgency. The woman, Jessica, a Belarusian immigrant with a weary but determined face, regarded him with suspicion. Her protective instincts flared instantly, standing firm to defend her children. She wasn't accustomed to being approached like this, especially by someone like John, whose expensive attire and confident demeanor practically screamed wealth and authority. "That's none of your business," she replied coldly, tightening her grip on one of the children's hands. Her gaze was unyielding, a mix of pride and defiance locked onto his. "No, it is my business," John countered, slowly removing his dark sunglasses to reveal his piercing light eyes, the same eyes shared by the 4 children standing behind her. "These kids look just like me. You can see it too." Froze, her eyes darting between John and the children. The resemblance was undeniable, as if they were reflections of the same source. A lump formed in her throat as her mind raced. "It can't be," she thought, her thoughts spiraling in every direction. Though momentarily stunned, she managed to regain her composure and responded firmly. "The resemblance is striking. Yes, but they don't have a father," she said, her voice trembling but steady as she clung to her secret. "They're my children. Only mine." John took another step closer, his gaze sharp yet calm. "Listen," he said, his tone gentle yet determined. "My name is John, and I swear to God I don't mean you or the kids any harm. But I need the truth. Who is their father?" Its stare hardened as she fought back a whirlwind of emotions. She wanted to shield her children and distance herself from this man, who could disrupt the life she'd worked so hard to build. Yet, she couldn't ignore what was right in front of her. "You have no right to ask me these questions," she snapped, her voice rising with tension. "They don't have a father. I've already told you, they're mine and mine alone." "Look, I don't know how this is even possible," John said, his voice softening. "I don't have a twin or even siblings, but there has to be an explanation. Please, I just want to figure this out." Turned pale, her mind racing for words, unsure of how to respond. John studied her intently, his thoughts darting like flashes of lightning. Memories of a decision he had made years ago, one that seemed inconsequential at the time, suddenly resurfaced, now taking on a whole new meaning. He stepped closer to, their eyes locking as he spoke. His voice was heavy, carrying emotions he struggled to keep in check. "Tell me," he began. "Were you at a fertility clinic in Moscow about 6 years ago?" Froze as if struck by an electric shock. Her face lost all color, and her lips trembled slightly. She tried to compose herself, but the truth was betrayed in her every movement. Memories of those challenging days, filled with uncertainty and loneliness, hit her like a tidal wave. Lowering her gaze, she could no longer meet John's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. John felt as though the ground beneath him had disappeared. Everything began to click into place, though not in any way he could have expected. Back when his investments were faltering and financial pressures mounted, he made a decision he had rarely thought about since. In need of quick cash, he became a donor under a strict contract stipulating that his donation could be used only once and for just one woman. And now, standing before him were 4 children, each one bearing his features as if they were reflections of himself. John ran a hand through his hair, struggling to process what was happening. Could they really be my children? He thought, the realization hitting him like a freight train. His legs felt weak, and he leaned against his car for support. John took a deep breath, his voice gaining strength even as doubt lingered in its tone. "Get in the car with the kids," he said with surprising resolve. "Don't ask questions. I need your help. This is a matter of life and death." Stared at him, bewildered by his urgency and persistence. She didn't know what to think. Her world felt as though it had turned upside down in an instant. Yet deep inside, a small voice told her to trust this man, this stranger who somehow seemed connected to her children. Without saying a word, she glanced at her 4 little ones, who, unaware of the gravity of the situation, looked at John with a mix of curiosity and even a hint of affection. After a moment's hesitation, nodded, though a thought lingered in her mind. He can't be some kind of maniac. He looks far too much like the kids. I need to figure this out. All right, she whispered. As the children approached the car, the kids stopped in their tracks, their eyes widening in awe at the sleek, shiny vehicle. Their excitement was palpable. The most curious of the bunch tentatively reached out to touch the door. Mom, is this our new car? The boy asked, his gaze fixed on the luxurious interior. John opened the doors, a faint smile crossing his lips. The children, holding their breath, clambered inside one by one, settling carefully into the plush seats. Their eyes sparkled with wonder as they explored, their small hands grazing the soft upholstery. They had never ridden in such an expensive car before. Wow, it's so fancy in here, one of the girls exclaimed, her voice filled with awe as she admired every detail around her. She was the boldest of the group, her personality already showing strength and confidence, clearly older than the others. When the engine roared to life, the kids clung to their seats in surprise, freezing for a moment. One of them even huddled close to his sister, but soon laughter filled the car as they realized how much fun it was. Wow, it's so fast, one of the boys exclaimed joyfully, flashing John a radiant smile. The kids looked thrilled, a little overwhelmed but undeniably happy. Warmth unexpectedly welled up inside John. He couldn't shake the surreal feeling that this moment wasn't entirely real. The car, which had fallen into a heavy silence, seemed to amplify the emotions that neither adult dared to voice. John gripped the steering wheel tightly, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, though his thoughts wandered far. The familiar hum of the engine, once a symbol of control, now felt like background noise. Sat beside him, barely acknowledging the opulent surroundings, lost in her thoughts about how she would explain everything to the children later. Meanwhile, the kids, blissfully unaware of the tension gripping the adults, gazed out the windows at the passing streets and people, their innocence untouched by the storm brewing inside the car. Finally, John broke the silence, his voice soft, almost a whisper, yet laced with restrained intensity. What's your name? He asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. Jessica, she replied, her voice faint, almost as if she were speaking to herself. But why? He asked, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Why did you choose to become a donor? He paused briefly, careful to keep his tone gentle. You're so beautiful and strong. Why wasn't there someone by your side to share such an important moment with you? Her lips pressed together as she searched for the right words to say. She stayed quiet for a few seconds before taking a deep breath. Keeping her composure, she began to speak. It's not always easy to explain why we make certain choices, she said softly, her voice carrying an understated wisdom. Sometimes, life pushes us onto paths we never anticipated, and we find ourselves fighting for things we never thought would be so difficult to achieve. John listened intently, not interrupting, absorbing every word. I came here from Belarus 9 years ago, she continued. I was married then. At first, everything seemed perfect, or at least, that's what I thought. But soon, things took a dark turn. He began to belittle me and resent me for not being able to give him a child. We were married for 3 years, and during that time, he convinced me that my worth as a woman depended entirely on whether or not I could become a mother. She paused, her expression clouded with painful memories, her gaze drifting into the past. And then, the diagnosis came, she said. Infertility. It hit me like a sentence handed down by fate. My marriage didn't fall apart because I wanted it to. It ended because he couldn't see anything in me but failure. He left me because I couldn't live up to the expectations society places on women. John felt a lump in his throat, struggling to imagine what she had endured. We divorced quickly, she continued, her voice steady with a quiet strength. He left me the apartment we had shared, but everything else we had built together became his. I gathered what little savings I had and made a decision. If I were going to become a mother, I would do it on my own terms. I put everything I had into IVF. It was a risk, and I knew that. But when life pushes you to the edge of a cliff, you have to choose. Do you leap with hope or give in to despair? Added that when she successfully completed all the necessary procedures, she lay there imagining the moment she would finally hear the news she longed for. The doctor beamed as he delivered the announcement. Congratulations, you're going to be a mom. And let me add, a mom of 4. She was stunned, unable to fathom how she would manage everything ahead. Pausing for a moment, she took a deep breath. Her voice trembled slightly, but it carried the strength she had built through every hardship. 9 months later, my quadruplets were born, John, she said. They are everything to me, my strength, my joy. Everything I've done since that day has been for them. I never sought out a man to provide for them or to rescue me. My children are my reason for living, not my motivation, she said firmly. John sat silently, deeply moved not just by her story but by the calm determination with which she shared it. He had never met anyone who approached life with such profound clarity. In his world, people chased wealth, polished appearances, and instant fame. Yet spoke with a depth he hadn't understood until now. You know, she said with a soft smile, though her eyes glistened. Sometimes life breaks us so we can rebuild ourselves stronger. Those who only see the surface will never grasp this. But those who have walked through darkness understand that real gold lies hidden beneath layers of dust. My children are that gold. It doesn't matter how they came into my life, they are my greatest treasure. The car grew quiet again, but this time, it was a silence filled with understanding. While the kids played in the back seat, John felt something shift within him for the first time in years, as if a veil of superficiality had been lifted, revealing truths he had never sought or even considered. He realized he couldn't delay an important conversation any longer. John decided it was time to tell where they were really headed. Turning toward her, he took a deep breath and began. I want you to know where we're going. He tried to keep his voice steady. We're heading to the clinic so I can officially confirm that I am, in fact, the father of these 4 amazing kids. This is something I need to do, and I hope you're okay with it. To his surprise, didn't object. She listened to him intently and gave a simple nod. To her, it was already clear that these were his children, or at least, she wanted to believe it. When they arrived at the clinic, John went straight to the front desk to arrange an urgent DNA test. The staff informed them the results would take an hour, but to John, that hour felt like an eternity. His nerves were on full display, his face tense, his hands slightly trembling. A storm of conflicting emotions raged within him, knowing the results could change his life forever. Zrania, on the other hand, remained calm. Standing beside him with a faint smile, she seemed completely unaffected by his anxiety. For her, nothing was at stake. She was already their mother, and that fact could never change. But as she watched John, she was reminded of the emotions she felt when she first embarked on the journey of IVF. When the results were finally ready, John's heart pounded as though it might burst from his chest. Holding the envelope in his hands, he froze for a moment, hesitant to open it. But steady gaze and reassuring smile gave him the courage he needed. Slowly, John tore open the envelope and scanned the words inside. The answer was clear and undeniable. He was, without question, the father of those 4 children. In that instant, his entire world shifted. It felt as though time stood still, and one word echoed in his mind. Father. The realization hit him all at once, overwhelming him completely. He wasn't just their biological father, he now bore the responsibility for their lives, their happiness, and their future. A wave of warmth spread through him, unlike anything he had ever felt. His hands stopped trembling, his face softened, and he looked at the children with newfound understanding. These weren't just kids who resembled him, they were his children. Noticing the change in his expression, gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "I can't believe it," she said joyfully. "They have a father now. We'll have to find the right time to share this with them." John simply nodded, at a loss for words. He felt as though he had just uncovered the most profound truth of his life. John and quickly gathered themselves and walked out of the clinic together. They got into the car, and despite his nervousness, John turned to the kids, who were happily playing in the backseat, completely unaware that their lives had just changed. It suddenly dawned on him that he didn't even know their names. He turned toward them with a gentle smile. "Hey kids," he began, "let's finally get to know each other." He extended his hand, inviting them into the moment. The kids eagerly took the cue. One by one, they introduced themselves and shared a little about their interests. John's smile never faded as he listened, learning who loved drawing, who was obsessed with toy cars, and who dreamed of becoming an astronaut or a ballerina. Each name and passion felt like a precious detail, revealing these amazing little personalities. As time passed, the children began to feel more comfortable around him, and, watching this unfold, smiled too, sensing that the distance between John and the kids was starting to shrink. Once everyone had settled in, John, looking at the kids with warmth, finally felt ready for the important conversation. "There's something I want to tell you," he said, looking each of them in the eyes. "I'm your dad," he continued. "And you've probably noticed how much we look alike. Now we know for sure, and that means we'll have plenty of time ahead to really get to know each other." When John told the kids he was their father, the car fell silent for a moment, before it was filled with excited laughter and joyful shouts. It was as if they were just realizing it, and began eagerly pointing out their features, comparing them to John's. "I have eyes just like yours," one of the boys shouted, opening his dark eyes wide to show John. "And I have a nose just like yours," the girl chimed in with a light laugh, touching her little nose. "And our hair is just like yours," another child said, tousling his light curls proudly, looking up at John. They started examining each other, finding similarities and comparing themselves to him. John couldn't help but smile, watching as the children found pieces of themselves in him. In that moment, he felt that these resemblances were more than just physical features. He suggested to the kids that they meet someone very important to him. "Who is it?" asked one of the boys, his eyes wide with curiosity. You'll find out soon enough, but we can't delay this any longer," John said with a gentle smile. The kids exchanged glances and, sensing the seriousness in his tone, fell silent. John felt that this meeting would be another crucial step for all of them. The quiet in the car was broken by the soft sound of the car's brakes as John slowed down, and everyone noticed a large, beautiful house in front of them. The tall gates automatically opened, granting them access to the sprawling property. The kids couldn't contain their excitement, jumping out of the car and running around, laughing as they dashed along the green pathways near the house. "Kids, be careful," called out, trying to bring them under control. "Watch the flowers." But her attempts were in vain. The four little ones continued to run around, enchanted by the vast space surrounding them. A little embarrassed by her inability to calm them, glanced at John as if to apologize. But he just smiled slightly and mysteriously. "Let them run," he said with an unexpected calmness that surprised her. "They're home with their father," he added. The words hung in the air, leaving both bewildered and impressed. She looked at him, confused. There was something strange about what he had said, yet deeply meaningful at the same time. "Why did you bring us here?" she asked, still puzzled. "You said it couldn't wait. But why?" John looked at her for a moment, maintaining his enigmatic demeanor, then extended his hand and gently said, "Let's go together." Called out to the kids, who, still excited, ran after John, laughing and playing around as he led them toward the house. Once inside, they walked down a long carpeted hallway until John stopped in front of a door that looked slightly more worn than the others. He slowly opened it, and they were greeted by a dimly lit room, with only a lamp casting light over an antique bed. "This is you, John?" A trembling voice came from inside the room. It belonged to an elderly woman, likely in her 80s, sitting on the bed. Her body was frail, and her eyes, clouded with age, seemed barely able to see. But there was a quiet strength in her expression, despite her frailty. John froze for a moment, his face shifting dramatically. All the usual toughness and control he carried vanished, revealing a vulnerability that hadn't noticed in him during their journey. "This is my grandmother, Karen," John whispered too. "She raised me since I was a child." He approached the bed carefully, gently taking her hand in his voice cracking unexpectedly. "Grandmother, I don't want you to leave this world without fulfilling your greatest wish," he said, his words breaking slightly with emotion. "I didn't bring you just one great-grandchild," he continued, his voice faltering. "I brought you 4. The elderly woman, her vision barely able to make out the shapes around her, blinked in shock. Her eyes widened, and a single tear slowly rolled down her cheek. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if time had stopped. 4? The grandmother whispered, trying to process what she had just heard. "My great-grandchildren," John nodded. His hand trembled slightly as he intertwined his fingers with hers. Zrania, sensing the gravity of the moment, approached the bed. Overcome with deep respect, she knelt beside the elderly woman. She gently took her other hand in hers and said softly, pouring all the love and gratitude she felt into every word. "Yes, Karen, these are your great-grandchildren. They were born out of great love, and they've been a light in my life, and now, in yours." The grandmother, deeply moved by his words, squeezed her hand as tightly as her strength would allow. "Dear," she whispered, her voice faint but filled with unwavering truth. "The life you've brought into this house is a gift that no stars could ever measure. I don't know how these children found their way to you. I don't know how fate brought your heart together with theirs. But deep inside, I know that your love for them was destined long before the wind whispered their names. I see in your eyes the tenderness that only true love can give." Tears welled up in his eyes, but her smile never wavered. It was a moment of unexpected but breathtaking beauty, and the connection that had just formed between her and the grandmother was deep, transcending blood relations. John, standing beside them and watching, for the first time in a long while, felt his heart beating not just with the rhythm of business success and achievement, but with a warmth filled with peace. He realized that perhaps, for his whole life, he had been searching for this very thing, though he hadn't understood it until now. The children, who had been curiously watching from the doorway, rushed to the bed and settled beside their great-grandmother, surrounding her with their little hands. The elderly woman, surrounded by these 4 small lives, the symbols of her lineage, smiled with an indescribable tenderness. "Now I can go in peace," she whispered, looking at John with love and calm in her eyes. "Because I see you've found what truly matters." Deeply moved by these words, leaned down and kissed the elderly woman's hand, quietly promising herself to hold on to this new, yet vital family for all of them. "And what are their names, dear?" "What are the names of these angels you've brought into my life?" the grandmother asked, her soft smile radiating warmth, her voice filled with endless maternal love. Answered, each word a quiet, sincere whisper. "Each of them has a name with deep meaning. Ethan is the first. Her name symbolizes light that always finds a way, even in the deepest darkness. Andre is the second. His name means that love is a force that overcomes all. Zakar, the embodiment of wonder, represents the divine in every moment of life. And David, he's infinite love, love that never runs dry, love that stays with us forever." The grandmother, deeply moved by his words, took the tiny hands of the children with infinite tenderness. John, who had been silently observing, felt a tear slip down his cheek. He had never experienced a moment so genuine and profound. Before him were not just 4 children, but a promise of eternity, something he might have been searching for his whole life, without even realizing it. That night, after the emotional meeting with his grandmother, John knew he couldn't let in the children return to their small apartment. As they sat in the spacious living room of the mansion, the children were already asleep, snuggled peacefully in her arms, while curiously took in the surroundings. John broke the silence. "I want you to stay here," he said calmly, but with an honesty that she couldn't help but notice. "There's enough room for all of you. I don't want you to go back to that tiny apartment. Don't worry about your things. Whatever you need, I'll get it tomorrow morning. But today, I want you to relax and enjoy some comfort." Looked at him, a little confused by his generosity. Yet at the same time, she could see the sincerity in his words, and she couldn't bring herself to refuse. Her life had been a constant struggle, but this man, with all his flaws, seemed to offer her something more than just material support. He was offering something much more valuable. "You know, John," she said softly, gently brushing the children's hair, "material things don't always bring happiness. But sometimes, we need to be able to accept what's offered to us with gratitude. After all, love is measured not only by what we give but also by what we're willing to receive." John nodded, deeply moved by her words. Without hesitation, he showed them to the room where they could settle in. Meanwhile, the children ran toward him, laughing and hugging his legs as if competing to see who could hold him tighter. "Look, Mom," they exclaimed, giggling and embracing him. I hugged him tighter, shouted one little one, pressing closer. John could no longer hold back his emotions and hugged them all tightly, feeling a warmth and happiness he'd never experienced before. Go rest now, he said with a smile through his tears. Tomorrow will be a special day. Watched from a distance, seeing how this man, who had once seemed cold and distant to her, was changing right before her eyes. It was clear that the love of these children had transformed him, revealing someone completely different. The next morning, they were awakened by the bright sunshine, and John and the quadruplets set out for a day that promised to be unforgettable. Their first stop was a high-end clothing store, where the children, along with joyfully tried on new outfits. Each new ensemble was met with genuine excitement. After picking out everything they needed, they headed to a fancy restaurant in downtown Moscow, where a delicious lunch awaited them. After lunch, they went to an amusement park, where the children happily rode swings, carousels, slides, and little trains. Laughter echoed everywhere as they played and frolicked in the fresh air. But little did they know, an unpleasant surprise awaited them at home. To wrap up the day, they visited a well-known ice cream parlor, where the entire family enjoyed massive servings of ice cream, exchanging smiles and laughter. It was a day filled with joy and happiness, a day they savored like never before. When they returned home, the atmosphere was calm and peaceful. But as soon as they entered the lobby, something unexpected greeted them. At the far end of the hall stood an elegant woman with a refined appearance. She was wearing an expensive fur coat and sparkling jewelry around her neck and ears. Her hair was styled perfectly, as though she had just stepped off a runway at a European fashion show. John froze, as if paralyzed at the sight of her, his face turning pale. "Who is this woman?" asked, puzzled by the tension on the father of her children's face. John didn't respond, as if he had lost the ability to speak. The woman, noticing his confusion, stepped forward with a confident, almost arrogant smile. "Let me answer for him, darling," she said, her voice dripping with icy superiority. "I'm Emilia, a model and John's fiancée. I'm here to marry him." The words hung in the air, and John's heart seemed to stop. "What are you talking about?" he exclaimed, stepping forward and looking at her with disbelief. "I never proposed to you. You know I'm not a fan of marriage formalities." Emilia, not losing her composure, gave a sarcastic laugh. Her eyes swept over before turning back to John, and she smiled dismissively. "My dear, you'll change your mind soon enough," she said with a cold undertone. "But tell me, who is this modest woman, and who are these 4 children who look so much like you?" The question left John in shock, unable to find words. Finally, spoke up. "My name is Jessica," she said firmly. "And these are my children." She paused, purposefully locking eyes with Emilia, then turned her gaze to John. "Correction," she added. "These are our children. They have a wonderful father, and I'm sure he's a great dad to them." As words landed like a bombshell, Emilia's face twisted with anger, her eyes narrowed, and the color drained from her face. "How could John want you?" Emilia exclaimed, her voice rising with every word. "Why would someone like him be interested in a plain woman like you? Everyone knows John always preferred women from high society, beautiful and sophisticated," she added, flashing a self-satisfied smile as she fixed a stray lock of her perfect hairstyle. "Our relationship has been going on for a year, and it's the most serious one he's ever had. I'm the love of his life." John felt a storm of emotions rising within him. His gaze flickered between the haughty Emilia and, whose eyes showed a mix of determination and vulnerability. Gathering his strength, he interrupted her smug declaration. "Where did you get the idea that we're getting married?" John demanded, his voice sounding colder than usual. Emilia didn't immediately answer. Instead, she walked over to the couch with the grace of someone used to being the center of attention. From her expensive handbag, she pulled out an envelope and dramatically showed John the images inside, smiling with a smug look. "We're expecting triplets," she announced. Then, she slowly unbuttoned her coat, revealing a rounded belly that was already starting to show. A heavy silence fell in the room as, her gaze firm, looked straight at Emilia. "Madam," said calmly and with conviction, "the worth of a person is not measured by the luxury they wear, but by the strength and sincerity of their love. True gold doesn't always shine on the surface. It is hidden, waiting for those who can look deeper." Without waiting for a response, turned to John and, giving a warm glance at the children, said, "I'll take the children to the other room so they can rest. I'm sure you need some time to discuss preparations for your wedding." Her voice faltered on the last word. The silence that followed was almost suffocating. The children looked around curiously, holding hands tightly as she began to climb the stairs. John, however, was lost in his own thoughts. Emilia stepped forward, her voice filled with indignation. "Why are you bothering with this poor woman? There's no reason for her to stay and listen to our conversation. We have plenty to discuss ahead. After all, we have a wedding to prepare for, my love." John looked at her with cold eyes, his tone firm in a way he had never shown before. "There's nothing to discuss here, Emilia," he said sternly. "It's simple. We're no longer a couple." With those words, he turned away from her and walked toward the children, leaving Emilia in a state of shock and confusion. Emilia, struggling to regain her composure, shot John a furious glance. She tried to pull herself together and, with cold contempt, addressed. "Let this woman go take care of her children," she growled. "Just forget her as a mistake. Let's focus on our future." Tightened her grip on the children's small hands, unwilling to remain a witness to their conversation. But before she could fully leave, a familiar sound of footsteps echoed. It was the creaking of a walker. John's grandmother, who was usually confined to her room and barely moved around the house, appeared in the doorway. Weak but determined, she took a few steps toward them. Her face radiated strength and authority, a side no one had seen before. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice surprisingly firm for her age. Turning to, who was standing on the stairs with the children, she gave a firm command. "Come back here with my great-grandchildren. This is my home. And this place is for all of you." Smiled sternly, her eyes filled with emotion. She slowly descended the stairs, holding the children's hands tightly. The children, laughing and teasing each other, playfully raced down the steps, making it an impromptu competition to see who could reach the bottom first. The grandmother turned to John again. Her eyes were filled with questions and understanding. "John, can you explain to me what's going on here?" John swallowed hard, feeling the tension that filled the room. He gathered his strength and responded, "Grandma, Emilia claims she's expecting triplets, and that they're mine. She insists on the wedding. But I don't understand how this is even possible." Emilia, realizing the situation was slipping out of her control, stepped forward. She reached for John's hand, trying to ease the tension with a sweet smile. "My love, we've been through so much together. And now, we'll have a real family." However, the grandmother, closely watching her every word and expression, wasn't fooled. Her gaze hardened, and she turned to Emilia, speaking with unyielding firmness. "I will answer your questions, Emilia. And you won't like my response. Yes. I'm calling you out. I'd rather choose this woman, who has nothing but sincerity, over you," she continued. "And don't even try to claim our family name for your own selfish reasons." John was stunned by his grandmother's words. He couldn't fully comprehend where this strong rejection was coming from. His eyes widened in confusion as he looked at her. She continued, "John, my dear grandson. Perhaps you've forgotten. A few years ago, you had surgery for a serious condition that required intervention. Do you remember? You also agreed to a vasectomy as a preventive measure. You made that decision without telling me." Memories from the hospital rushed into his mind. He remembered how difficult it was to make that choice, how the fear of commitment and the future led him to choose sterilization to avoid unforeseen complications. He thought his grandmother didn't know about the procedure. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice filled with confusion. "How did you find out? I thought you only knew about that surgery, but not the rest." His grandmother nodded slowly, holding his gaze. "I've always known, my dear. I spoke with the doctors privately, secretly, to find out everything. I knew about the vasectomy, and although it hurt me deeply, I accepted your decision. But everything changed yesterday when this wonderful woman brought your children here. I realized that life had other plans for you, and for all of us, giving you, and us, a miracle, though in a different way." Her words were gentle, but they carried a firmness and conviction that couldn't be ignored. She looked at John again, her eyes full of wisdom accumulated over many years. "John," she said softly, "I knew you never canceled that surgery. I've been watching over your health all this time, even if you didn't notice. I knew you couldn't have biological children since then, and I've been waiting for a miracle, for fate to give you children another way. And now, here they are. This wonderful woman and her children, your children." John felt the ground slip out from beneath him. The truth his grandmother had just revealed hit him like a tidal wave. He realized that his decision had taken away her hope for heirs, not understanding how important it had been to her. Emilia, trying to keep her composure, took a deep breath and blurted out, "This is absurd." Her voice was desperate. "She doesn't know what she's saying. I'm pregnant, she declared, her voice piercing. "You can't be pregnant with my grandson's child," she said calmly. "It's impossible." The person who had been silently watching everything unfold sighed deeply and stepped forward. She turned to John. Her eyes were filled with sympathy and understanding. John could feel the wave of emotions building inside him. As he watched the children still playing joyfully, unaware of the storm brewing around them, he slowly knelt down in front of them to get a better look. He felt a tear slip down his cheek. He gently stroked one of the boys' heads and silently thought to himself, "I didn't know I could love someone this much." His grandmother, standing off to the side, watched her grandson with pride. Her heart, which she had kept guarded for so long, finally filled with joy. She had long feared that John would never open himself up to true love. But now, John turned back to Emilia, his gaze calm and resolute. "It's over, Emilia," he said clearly and firmly. "I don't know how you could come up with such a lie. But you can't be pregnant with my child. You have no place here." Emilia, realizing her plan was falling apart, shot him a look of pure hatred. She spun around abruptly and stormed out of the room, throwing over her shoulder, "I should have stayed in Paris. At least there, the father of my children, though a poor failure, would be happy with me. Stay with your little beggar." John, still deeply shaken by what had just transpired, turned toward his grandmother. He understood that his life had changed completely. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his hand. He began, his voice wavering. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, and I understand that this isn't easy. But if you'll let me, I want to be the father these kids deserve. I also want to be a part of your life. I've realized I need someone like you by my side." Gazed at him for a long time before responding. Then, her face broke into a soft, warm smile. "Every new day," she whispered, "is like the sunrise. Life always gives us a second chance. We can start over together." His grandmother, unable to hold back her tears of joy, stepped toward them. She was filled with pride for her grandson. She had watched him change so much. The children, still unaware of what was happening, ran up to John and, hugging them both. A few months later, John and were no longer just living together with the kids. They had grown closer. Began to lean in, wanting to make a good impression on John. John, noticing the change, showered with compliments. He took her on sweet dates and surprised her with gifts. But most of all, he loved how, when he came home, the children were always happy and excited, with new games and activities. He eagerly ran to put them to bed, reading them stories, kissing them goodnight, and then quickly making time for. She was clearly different from all the women he had met before. Over time, John began to realize that his feelings for her had evolved. He no longer just admired her kindness and care for the children. He found himself truly falling for her. Every movement she made, every look she gave, stirred something warm and tender inside him. John caught himself thinking about her even while at work, eagerly anticipating the moments when he would return home to see her and hear her voice. Logically, too, wasn't indifferent. Her heart skipped a beat every time he came near. Every time John came home, noticed the genuine joy in his eyes. She would watch him every evening as he played with the kids, read them bedtime stories, and kiss them gently goodnight. Could feel that someone had entered her life, the person she had always hoped for and dreamed about. With each passing day, she realized that her feelings for him were growing deeper. One evening, after dinner, John invited for a walk in the garden. They stepped out under the starry sky, and John, gathering his thoughts, took her hand. "You've become an important person to me," he began. "You're not just the mother of our children, or the one who fills our home with warmth. You're a part of my life, and I want that to last forever." Then, with a slight nervousness, John pulled out a small box from his pocket, opened it, and revealed a beautiful ring. His voice was steady but full of warmth. "Will you marry me?" His eyes sparkled with happiness. She felt her heart fill with joy. "Yes, John," she whispered softly, smiling back at him. In that moment, they both realized they had become a true family. From that day on, John knew his life had changed forever. He had found the true meaning of wealth, not in money, but in family, in the laughter of children, and in the simple joys that can't be measured. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. Leave a comment below telling us what you think. Does it sound like truth, or is it just a story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share the video with your friends and loved ones, and tell us what you think. It helps us continue bringing new stories every day. Make sure you don't miss the next incredible story that will be appearing on your screen soon. We truly appreciate you being with us. You can also check out our catalog in the description below the video.